This is Talking Heads, and our live studio guest is Treasury Minister Alf Cannan. We're talking about the government's proposed purchase of the steam packet company, subject, of course, to Tynwald approval. Is it next Tuesday that this goes before Tynwald? Sorry, I've not got your right mic up. There you go.
Yes, it is, Stu.
Yeah, next Tuesday. Do you expect any problems with that, or is this going to be a clear-cut thing?
Well, I would expect a number of comments from Tynwald members about the overall future of the steam packet company. But there's been a very positive reception to this. Clearly, Tynwald members have been party to a lot more facts and figures than we've been able to put out in general.
You briefed them on Tuesday and then again yesterday, I think, didn't you?
They had a more detailed briefing yesterday. But essentially, the broad outline is pretty much as we're discussing here today. And I am hopeful and I trust that Tynwald members will understand that this is not about 6 months, 6 years cash flow. This is about stability, economic and social stability from our major lifeline for the next 25 plus years.
Is it going to be a free vote effectively in Tynwald, or is there going to be pressure put on people to do the right thing?
Look, the Council of Ministers have unanimously supported this. And the Council of Ministers accepts that this negotiation pretty much for the most part has taken place behind closed doors. The Council of Ministers have been in the loop. Other Tynwald MHKs have not, for understandable reasons. And in fact, to be fair even to the Council of Ministers, most of the detail of this has just been within Treasury's walls, and that's been reported back on a regular basis, but bi-monthly I would have suggested in terms of progress. And the Council of Ministers obviously approved the initial offer, and they've approved the final offer, and they've done so unanimously. And the feedback that I've had, I am confident that certainly the House of Keys will support this, and I expect the Legislative Council to follow suit.
Good stuff. All right, let's go to the lines and take our first caller on this, and it's Howard. Hello, Howard.
Good morning, Minister, or shall I say good afternoon now.
Hi, Howard.
It's Stu. The steam packet, let's go back in the history, was always a private company. And through its history, it's had troubled times and good times. But when the shareholders, large and small, were scooped up gradually by Jim Sherwood and then moved into private hands as an individual, changes were in the offering, changes did take place, but since then it's moved back into the hedge funds and banks, as you rightly say. Is when the Isle of Man government take over not the running, but the ownership of it, the £76 million that's out in the open market there that the steam packet will have to pay somehow, what is to prevent them selling them to hedge funds and to various things which will undermine the then ownership of the steam packet by the Isle of Man government, because 76 million on the value that they've just bought is over half of it. So will there be a caveat built into the sale for future governments not to go down the road of selling the steam packet back to the hedge funds?
I think I know the answer to this, but let's ask the Minister.
Howard, thank you very much for your call. Absolutely. The key purpose of this will be to ensure that we have a framework agreements in place that will prevent the steam packet board doing something untoward with the finances of the company.
This is why you've split it, isn't it? This is why the 75 million is a loan that is unconnected with the shareholding. That's
correct. There will be a shareholders agreement with the company, and that shareholders agreement will prevent them taking actions such as the one you've just described without seeking majority or preferential shareholder approval.
All right. Thank you for your call, Howard. Comment, Stu, I congratulate Mr Cannan for making this move, but could you ask him why Manx taxpayers are effectively paying off the steam packet debt? That from Simon.
Well, I explained at the beginning of the show, Stu, how we have come to the valuation that we have come to. The bottom line is that if we don't act now, if we allow the situation to continue and choose to step in 2026, that is what is going to be stripped out of the company in terms of profits and cash. And for us, making this proposal now will ensure that we get the right value for the island, but more importantly, it's a sensible value in terms of explanation of the government's position and what vis-a-vis what would happen over the next 7 years if we didn't step in. So that's the cash value, and we will then restructure that. And we could have pretty much done it any way we wanted, but we will restructure that. So effectively, we do have a like-for-like debt replacement, but that makes sense because then we will ask the steam packet to refinance, and we will get our £76 million back.
Right. This text, my concern is over the complete lack of due process and public scrutiny around a major change in important national policy, rather than with the details of the proposed deal. Public ownership of the steam packet is a radical departure from previous government policy, with huge implications for the island's public finances. There's been no element of consultation on this new policy, for which government has no direct political mandate. Interesting point. Government's not even published a report explaining the benefits of state ownership and how it would work. All we have is the wording of the Tynwald motion produced at a week's notice and a news release telling us that government thinks it's a good idea. Tynwald is being bounced into a massive new policy commitment with no prior public discussion, explanation or information. Why is the democratic process being abandoned in this case? Some good points there.
Well, arguably, Stu, that applies to anything, any decision that the Manx government makes, because we don't run a party system here. We run a collective a collective system where individuals come to an agreement, and we progress based on many conversations and find effectively what you might describe as the middle ground. So, but the point is, I think the bigger point is that sometimes the reason why we're elected is because we're at the forefront and people are asking us to make decisions on their behalf, invariably one would hope to lead to better outcomes for the people of the island, and or decisions that will provide stability and provide basic services. So in terms of that, that big argument of around, is this democratic or is this not democratic, I absolutely firmly believe that I and others are doing what we've been asked to do, to go and scrutinise and to make the relevant decisions. Now, in terms of the broader picture, again, that same argument applies. I appreciate that the public have not seen the finite granular detail, the due diligence reports, haven't seen how, haven't got necessarily comfort that we've had the legal advisors cover every angle, what the plans are for the multiple companies that are associated with the steam packet. And again, you have to trust, to a certain extent, the judgment of the Council of Ministers and now Tynwald, who are getting more and more information around this. And again, not even the Tynwald members have seen the absolute granular detail. But we will hold ourselves up to public scrutiny on this. And the other point is, Stu, that I do want to make is that, yes, £124.3 million is going to exchange hands if Tynwald approve this. If Tynwald approve this as well, the plan, and I think it is a strong plan, is that £76 million of that will be back in the government account. So we are now talking about £48 million, which is a significant difference in terms of the overall price. And then we're talking about the structure around the £48 million. And bear in mind, there are risks. There always are risks with any kind of commercial deal, and particularly when you're stepping into this kind of scenario. And we wouldn't be doing it if there were 2 or 3 companies out there providing this service. But there is only room for one business. We all recognise that. And the strategic importance of keeping this business running in the best interests of the island has come to a point where we feel, and I strongly support this, that it is right for us to take a controlling interest, not because it's going to lead to significant slashing of fares, but because it will control fares, that will ultimately be more beneficial relatively. And
well, are they? Because everybody thinks that fares are going to go down.
Yeah, but they will relatively, because the first thing that we're going to do, I would suggest, is adjust that user agreement so that over the next 6 years, freight fares and consumer fares don't rise by, say, RPI, whatever rate that is. They'll be at CPI, so we'll automatically reduce that. Well, no, we're not going to slash fares because, Stu, we've got to still keep, and I told you this before, a commercially profitable company running. But isn't it better that that profit is more it is benefiting the island,
of course, absolutely,
then it is
no question
benefiting
about that.
Portuguese banks and hedge funds and Japanese banks and whoever else.
I mean,
is
also,
involved
in fairness to our last contributor's point, it's not as though this is a completely out of the thing, is it? Because there's been talk about the steam packet and who ought to own it and who ought to operate it for years. There was a public consultation, I think, a year or so ago about this, wasn't there?
There is a document that's out where the government, the Council of Ministers, rejected the proposals that the steam packet had brought forward, if you remember.
Well, that was a kind of a risk-free version for government, wasn't it? Because didn't that say that in exchange for a new user agreement, the steam packet would do a deal a little bit like the Manx gas one, where profits over a certain level came back to government? So you'd have got both the cake and be able to eat it.
I think that contained various proposals. I'd describe it as the nice glossy brochure from the salesman.
The government rejected.
Well, we did reject it because this government does not want to continue to be held with their backs against the wall by this type of arrangement when you've got one monopoly shipping business.
Yes.
And I think it's right that we stop the nonsense that's been going on, stop the nonsense of the behaviours that we've seen from people like Macquarie and Montague and others who've promptly doubled the value of the business, saddled it with debt and stripped it all out. And people who are saying, oh, well, just use the user agreement to control this. Well, who in the other side, user agreements are a two-way process. Who on the other side is going to start signing up to user agreements to say you cannot increase the debt or you cannot sell your shares?
How much interest did you were looking for expressions of interest from other shipping companies a while ago. How much did you actually get? Because no politicians ever actually admitted. Right. I suspect very few.
Well, there was few. There were a couple of expressions of interest, and I think they came from further afield than just on the UK shores. And I was quite distanced from that process. But the problem was, and the problem is, that government still had to deal with these shipping companies on the proviso that this was going to happen in 2026, because it was unlikely to be a scenario where they were effectively going to step in and then be told to buy the steam packet at the 2020 point when the user agreement could have been broken. So again, you were facing exactly the same scenario. And yes, the government could have started negotiating properly, probably would have had to gone out again in 2024 for expressions of interest. But we're taking huge risks. And also, again, I go back to the point, we have no effective control over our strategic shipping routes.
The certainty is one of the things that obviously appeals to government, that it's not going to be something that's going to be up for discussion again. It's once you own it, you've got it, and you can do pretty much what you like.
I'm sure there will be discussions, because you solve one problem, you'll probably create a dozen others, and who can say what can happen in 5 years' time. But, Stu, the key point here is we are firmly of the opinion that now is the time to act, not in 2026, that acting now strategically from the other side's perspective is also, there is a window of opportunity. If we lose this window of opportunity, the business is going to either get sold or stripped for cash, and we will have problems in 2026.
You say that you don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. One thing that we do know is that you're going to have to replace the boats, and that's something that's come up a number of times this week about the fact that, are you just buying two great lumps of scrap metal? I think one shipping expert said in one of the papers I saw this week that the two boats are only worth 15 million quid. So in terms of the value of the company, the assets aren't really particularly strong.
Absolutely, Stu. But we're not buying necessarily the assets here. We are buying a monopoly shipping business that is cash generative, and it is the cash that we are focusing on. And your shipping expert's absolutely right. We realise that the company will have to go about purchasing new ships, and that will have to happen imminently if we are going to meet the kind of service levels that the public would want to see from the steam packet company. And as I've said previously, we've built that into the cash flows of the business. We will give it a helping hand, not by lending them any money to do so, but by not stripping out any capital repayments into any of our shareholding or loans. And indeed, when the steam packet come to structure any public borrowing, then they will do so in such a way where they don't have to start paying capital back on that until after the new ships are acquired.
And these are going to cost something like £80 million as well, aren't they? So, it's making it sound as though this is a £200 million deal, actually.
Well, I don't understand why you would say that, because the government are not going to be held liable for
Right.
this. The business is
The
going
business
to
is going to
this
generate
is
the profit
part
to
of
do it.
day-to-day business, and this has got to be seen in the long term, Stu, in terms of the return. We have looked at the figures through to 2042. If the government just took a shareholding and took 100% shareholding, there's 124 million pounds. We're going to double our money and get it back, and we could do so in a variety of ways. This is not about the government wanting to play Mr. Big Businessman. This is about the government wanting control in the best interest of the island, economically and socially, and that's our key driver. And we recognise that in promoting that, we've also got to be cognizant of the cash values and the income streams and profitability of this shipping business. And we're confident that having got that strategic control, we can provide a framework for everybody to benefit from the debt repayments, from the shareholding, and at the same time get a better framework to control prices that are ultimately impacting on your family on the street.
All right. Good.